Hey everybody, good to see you. Doing chapter 8, lesson 3. Helping myself to some of these flip sides right here. Fantastic cookie. Don't know if you've ever had it before. Delish. Anyway, chapter 8, lesson 3. We're going to keep talking about how America's cultural identity changes in the 1920s. We covered all this kind of return to normalcy stuff, right? Where we were going back to the way things used to be. We've got America that's really kind of in turmoil with the 1920s, Red Scare, economic turmoil, racial turmoil. So we have an America that's really kind of at unrest, trying to find itself again in the 1920s. So what you should not be surprised by, I guess, is kind of what I'm getting at here, is that some of the old attitudes about our culture, about who we are as a people, from the Gilded Age are going to return as well. And that makes sense, right? I mean, if Harding and Coolidge and Hoover want to go back to the way that things were economically, then they might also want to go back to the way things were culturally. So there's going to be a couple of really big changes going on here in the 1920s culturally. We're going to see a return of nativism. That's going to be one. We're going to see the beginning of something called the New Morality, where women and young people really start to kind of push for their own sense of identity as they kind of gain more of an economic foothold in the 1920s, of their own identity. We're going to see pushback against some of these new moralities that these individuals want to have, and people that don't want to see that much change that fast in society. And then we're going to see also a push, really our country almost split half and half, for something called prohibition, as America kind of was destroying itself in the 1920s and before with alcohol. So we're going to see kind of three big changes here, this issue of nativism, new morality, and then prohibition. That's our plan anyway. Now let's start with this conversation on how has the cultural identity of the United States changed over time, by hearkening back to this concept of nativism. Remember that nativism is this belief that your native land is under threat, right? It has to be protected, as it were, from immigrants, those dangerous immigrants that are coming to our country. They're taking jobs, they're working for lower pay, they're doing things that make it our culture under threat, right? Remember the way they changed our cities with different languages and foods and clothing and culture and all these different ways our cities and our urban areas changed, and that a lot of Americans said, well, this is not, time out, 30 seconds, time out, I don't want to be a part of this, it's making me nervous. So what we want to do is take a look at how that old idea of the 1870s returns. And those European immigrants that we've talked so much about are the ones that are going to be blamed for the problems of the 1920s, right? Because think about it. Red Scare, hello. Russians, Eastern Europeans, right? Hello. When we talk about people committing crimes, it's the impoverished, right? Well, all of the poor people happen to be from Eastern and Southern Europe because those are the new immigrants. So if we're talking about poor people committing crimes, then it's criminals coming from the immigrant pool. So it's their fault that we have all this crime. All the kinds of issues that we see really stressing out our country, working for low wages, can't afford cost of living, all those things, we blame on immigrants. And I'll give you a classic example of how that hatred of immigrants it can really alter the lives of people for good. The example I'm going to give you is the arrest of two Italian immigrants, two guys named Sacco and Vanzetti. Sacco and Vanzetti, these Italian immigrants, the factory workers, they're anarchists actually. They can't stand the fact that the American government treats the immigrant so bad. And they break into the factory and they're stealing the money because they're not paid at all. They wanted the money for themselves. And accidentally, boom, boom, two guys get shot, killed, dead. So what you end up with are these two Italian immigrants, Sacco and Vanzetti, being arrested. And the evidence is kind of murky. People aren't really sure if Sacco and Vanzetti did it. I mean, if you laid all the evidence out and you took a look at it, it's kind of questionable whether or not Sacco and Vanzetti actually committed this crime. But it doesn't matter to Americans, because they're Italian immigrants. And so the argument that Sacco and Vanzetti make, that you can see here on the slide, is that this case is about prejudice because of their ethnic origin. Vanzetti himself says that, you didn't convict me because I committed some crime. You didn't convict me because I'm a murderer or a burglar. You convicted me because you have this hatred in you. That's why you convicted me. That fear, that resentment. And really, that fear and resentment is worldwide. And so is the reaction against it. There are protests that erupt all over America, all over the world, to try and free and promote innocence for Sacco and Vanzetti. Because in the eyes of a lot of people, this isn't about an actual crime. It's a trial on immigration. Because Americans were afraid that Uncle Sam was being swallowed up. Swallowed up by the foreigner. I mean, look at that, right? There's Uncle Sam right in the middle, being swallowed up by that foreigner. His head's already swallowed by this Eastern or Southern European. Over here, his feet are being swallowed up by an Asian immigrant. They're afraid that our culture is going to be changing. And they don't like that change because they don't know what it's going to mean. So they're going to push our politicians because of this fear, this nativism, to make change, to slow immigration, to stop it, to defend traditional American culture. And our government's going to say, you know what, we're going to do something about this. We're going to slow this pace of immigrants coming in. Take a look at this pie graph right here, or pie chart right here. In red, these are immigrants that the traditional American culture says is the right kind. These are people that are British and French and Northern German. They have similar cultures. A lot of them speak English. It's what people are familiar with, like white male society. Over time, during the Second Industrial Revolution, that number dramatically shifts so that by 1900 to 1910, when the Second Industrial Revolution, the Gilded Age, is coming to an end, it's primarily immigrants from South and Eastern Europe that are coming to America. And that's what's getting people really upset about this, because they're really saying, look at all this dramatic and fast change happening to our cities. We're hearing different languages, seeing different things. This isn't America that these people knew. This is some different America, and it's making people scared. It's making them afraid. Continues all the way up to the 1920s. And our government's going to say, oh my gosh, we need to defend traditional American culture from these crazy Eastern and Southern Europeans who just do things differently. They don't like the fact that they're Jewish or Catholic, that they're Russian, Polish, whatever. So this fear of the immigrant is going to lead to a couple of new laws being passed. Laws that are important because they're, for the first time ever, America establishes something called a quota. A specific number of immigrants allowed to come to our country based on where you live and what your ethnicity is. If you are from Western Europe, British, French, Northern German, Northern Europe, Scandinavia, you're good to go. You can come back. You can come into our country. If you're from Eastern Europe, Southern Europe, we're not going to welcome you in, because what it says is we're only going to allow you in 3% of the total number of people already here. So if there's 30 people here in America that are British, we're going to allow only 3% of whatever group to come in next year, of that number to come in. If there's only 10% Italians, then 10 Italians and only 3% of that number can come in. So the goal is to try and massage the numbers, to shift the culture, to encourage immigration from Northern and Western Europe again, so that we have fewer people coming from Eastern and Southern Europe. And it works. They're able to, by using the laws, change who comes to our country. Take a look, right? You can see over here, just to the right of my ear, 1921 to 1930, thanks to the National Origins Act, thanks to the Emergency Quota Act, all of a sudden, immigrants from North and Western Europe are coming in here faster than immigrants are coming to America from Eastern and Southern Europe. So it's a strategy that pays off for them. But there's another question you have to ask, which is, what about all these people that work cheap, right? All these immigrants that are in our factories working for cheap? Well, where are we going to get all those workers from? So what our country does is it passes the National Origins Act, and it says there's going to be a group of immigrants exempt from this whole process of national origins, Latinos, And what we're saying is, if you're from Mexico, come on in, baby. You want those jobs? Come on in. We can replace these Eastern and Southern European people with Mexicans. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy, no problem. So we see a huge wave of immigrants from Mexico to kind of fill the void of those immigrants that have gone from Eastern and Southern Europe. The last group that we want to take a look at are people that also think they are out to defend America. And these are people that are embracing hatred. Fear leads to anger, right? That's what Yoda says. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. That fear of the immigrant emerges as anger. Anger at anyone who might be an immigrant. Catholic, Jew, African American. Anyone that might be un-American. So the Ku Klux Klan's message of white Protestant America, keep things the way they used to be, really resonates with average Americans. Membership soars in the 1920s. And this is typical when there is economic trouble, when there is instability. Fear of change usually promotes people who kind of had an advantage in the past, white people, to really say, we're going to fight to keep our privilege. Ku Klux Klan membership goes nationwide, all 50 states, from Hawaii to Maine, and the membership soars to 4 million, way more than what it had ever been previously. It's an influential group of people nationwide. There's even talk about a Ku Klux Klan member running for president during this time. That's how influential they are. Yeah, and I don't want you to think that the 1920s, I know we just talked about the Ku Klux Klan, that it's just full of hatred. It's not entirely that way. There are a lot of different groups of people pushing for their own kinds of ideas or change into our culture or freedom. A great example would be the young. Young people in the 1920s really embraced something that you can see up here in the upper right called the new morality. And the idea here is that we're young. We don't have to be like those old, doddering old people, our parents and grandparents who tell us that we can only behave a certain way. Instead, the young people say, no, we don't have to do that. We can live our own way with our people, whoever we want. We can behave the way we want to behave. We're smart, we're capable, we got jobs, we got money, we can do our own thing. An example of this kind of new morality, this high value on personal freedom, was a group of women. It's a small number of women, not most women, a small number of women who become a symbol of this kind of new freedom. They're called flappers. Totally unconventional young women. Just change the expectations. And again, they're not the everyday woman. 95% or whatever it would be of women are traditional, but the flapper becomes a symbol of this new morality because she's so different. She cuts her hair wicked short. She might smoke or drink or go out by herself without a male partner. She might stay out late. She might not get married. She might have premarital sex. She might use birth control. She might wear makeup and silk stockings. She might model, and a host of other things. I mean, look at this one right here. Look at this crazy lady getting arrested because she's showing too much legs and her shoulders in her little revealing bathing suit. That's what happened to her. Too revealing of a bathing suit, getting arrested because these flappers are challenging traditional morality. Now that makes older people, usually, and in the case of the 1920s it's true, really upset. Why do we have all these women going around attending college, not getting married, living their own lives? So what we end up seeing are women, traditional people fighting back. And the older Americans, their values were rooted mostly in religion and primarily Christianity. So when they begin to push back against this new morality, what they're going to say is, we want to push back with our own religious values, make a space for us again. And they're going to turn to something called fundamentalism to do it. Fundamentalists believe that Their religion is correct. It is literally true. It is the only truth. And in many cases, it is, as written in their holy book, completely true. Many Christian fundamentalists, for example, believe that what is written in the Bible is literally true the way it happens. So I'll give you an example. In the 1920s, there was a group of fundamentalists who believe in creationism. Well, a ton of people believed in creationism, that God created the earth in 7 days, exactly the way the Bible said it. That's it. No more conversation. Well, a bunch of other people were saying, dude, that Darwin, evolution, come on, these two things don't fit. So fundamentalists were having creationism taught in school. And some Americans said that that's not right. That's not fair for you to say that that's the only way. They wanted to push back. A group called the American Civil Liberties Union said, we're going to look for a teacher who's going to teach Darwinism, teach evolution, and we want that teacher to essentially go to jail to point out this difference between the new morality, freedom, choice, opportunity, and fundamentalist reaction, trying to keep things the way they were. This really upsets fundamentalists, as you might imagine, right? That traditional ideas are being challenged. This teacher, guy named John Scopes, he signs up, he goes to teach in Tennessee, he's arrested, put on trial, he loses, goes to jail. The Scopes monkey trial, essentially, while testing a law that bans the teaching of evolution, does more than that. It says we've got a real issue in the 1920s between where we want our culture to head. Do we want it to go where the new morality is going, or do we want it to return to traditional values? And there was a real tension to that. The last big change in the 1920s has little to do with what we've talked about, but actually kind of overarches over all of it. It's something that the poor embraced, and something that the wealthy embraced, something that women were embracing. Most Americans at the time embraced, in large quantities, alcohol. And alcohol was tearing our society apart. I don't think I can clearly explain just how devastatingly poisonous it had become to our society. I don't care what you think about drinking or not drinking. I don't care about your stance on underage drinking, overage drinking. That's not what I'm getting at. What I'm talking about is incredibly high rates of domestic violence, marital rape, child abuse, homelessness, joblessness, disease, all kinds of crime tied to alcoholism. Not just drinking, but alcoholism. The number of alcoholics in America was staggering. It was poisoning our country. Americans begin, and about half of Americans, slightly more than half of Americans, pushed hard for something called prohibition. And it went by state to state by state by state, people trying to prohibit the production, sale, and distribution of alcohol, trying to find some way to stop this poison from creating more alcoholics. It took some time, but as the 1920s dawned, the 18th Amendment was passed. July 1st, 1920. And that idea here was that we were going to dramatically increase the police powers of our government in an attempt to essentially combat the impact of alcohol. So we see the 18th Amendment passing, and we see the power of the police rise incredibly high. Over 540,000 Americans are arrested during the time of Prohibition. That's a tremendous number. And what that shows you is that a ton of Americans didn't stop drinking. We spent, and you can see it here on this chart, here's the amount of money we spent on alcohol and drug prohibition. Nothing, 1920. Boom! Huge upsurge in what we're spending on it. And when prohibition comes to an end, boom! Right back down again. Stays kind of low until we hit the 1970s. And there's a push again for fighting illegal drugs. And it continues to skyrocket, the amount of money that we spend on enforcement of drug and alcohol, because Americans viewed it as really hurting our society. American response to Prohibition is mixed. Some people believe it's going to really reduce, and it does reduce unemployment, domestic violence, and poverty. It does do that. A bunch of other Americans just ignore the law entirely, so they go to secret bars called speakeasies. They buy booze there. They produce booze in the countryside and smuggle it in called moonshine. Bootleggers smuggle this booze in. Organized crime, the mob. Hey, how you doing? I'm making an offer you can't resist. You're never going to be able to say no to me, huh? Do what I got to tell you to do. The mob organizes to distribute alcohol and prostitution at speakeasies, this bootlegging, and it's going to continue on for 10 years. More than 10 years, until the 21st Amendment is going to repeal Prohibition in 1933. So there's the cultural change that we talked about that we're going to see in the 1920s. We're going to do more work with this in class, obviously. So hope you did well on your quiz.